Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is our interview with the pastor of Morning View Baptist Church, Pastor Alvin Fleming. And I just want to say welcome and how you doing?
Doing fine, Brother Chris.
All right. Basically, I wanted to do this interview. I wanted to do it for Black History Month, but I didn't act on it, and it's been kind of bothering me ever since. But I feel like you have an interesting story. I just want people to know, especially black young men, to know, the journey it takes, to be successful, and how to stay on the right track in spite environments, in spite situations and things of that nature. So I thought it was really interesting, some things that you say in your sermons. I keep track of it, and I don't forget anything. So I kind of been putting your story together in my head, but I want you to tell it, and so that people can have an insight behind, not just the pastor, but the man, your life and your lifestyle. For instance, one of the things that intrigued me about you was when I first joined the church, I didn't see a Bentley or anything. I saw a Malibu. And if anybody had told me that was the pastor's car, I would have said no way, But I saw a Malibu, and that was just interesting to me, how, you could drive something else, but, you stuck with a Malibu, and that's uncommon for pastors in your position these days. That's just one small element of why I think your story is interesting and, behind your mindset and doing so, and doing those kind of things. So we're going to start off just with, just what city were you born in, and also what part of town you were raised in.
I was born in Memphis, Tennessee in the year of 1950. I grew up in the Foot Homes, which is a housing project area in Memphis. My mother raised two boys without the benefit of the father. I saw my father when I was 2 years old, and I didn't see him again until I did his eulogy. And that's when I was about 63 years old. So I grew up without knowing my father in a housing project area. After finishing high school, I joined the Marine Corps because at that time I had two choices, either the Marine Corps or trouble. And most of my friends ended up getting in trouble. College wasn't on my radar. I wasn't a very good student in high school. We didn't have any role models, and so I never even thought of going to college. So at the age of 17, I graduated and I joined the Marine Corps. After a year in the Marine Corps, I was sent to Vietnam. I was wounded twice in Vietnam, spent a year in the hospital. They operated on my face 14 times. During that time, I actually lost my will to live. I laid in the bed after getting wounded, and I didn't care if I ever got up out of the bed. I stopped eating. I didn't care if I ever made it back to the States again. I didn't care if I lived or died. I went through that for, I guess, about 45 to 50 days. And then the Lord touched me in a bed in Vietnam, and my life began to turn around. And I promised the Lord that if I did make it back, that I would do something. And I did make it back, and the Lord blessed me. As soon as I got out of service, I started looking for a school to go to. I went to the vocational school for respiratory therapy for 1 year. I finished in December of 1970, and I started working at the City of Memphis Hospital as a respiratory therapist on the 3 to 11 shift. I liked what I was doing. I worked in intensive care mainly, running the respirators for patients who had had heart attacks or some major disease or illness, and they could not breathe. Then we placed them on the breathing machines or the respirators, and we would breathe for them. In 1975, I decided to go to Memphis State part-time. So I worked full-time and went to school part-time. After 2 years, I decided to go to school full-time. So I attended Memphis State full-time, and I worked full-time.
So you're 25 years old at this point, or 20?
About 23 years old, yeah. And so I went to school full-time and worked full-time. And at that time, they passed a law that said a certified respiratory technician who had at least 2 years of college could take the registry. There are 2 levels in respiratory therapy. Technicians get 1 year of vocational training. Registered therapists have to have at least 2 years of college. So once I completed the 2 years of college, I decided to take the registry. At that time, there wasn't an African American registered therapist in Tennessee. So in 1980, I took the registry. It's a 2-part exam, a written exam and a clinical, where they give you 10 patient clinical situations and you decide how the patient should be treated. In 80, I passed the clinical, but I failed the written part of the exam. So in 1981, I applied to take it a second time. And in 1981, I passed the written and the clinical and became the first black registered respiratory therapist in the state of Tennessee.
Now, did you know you was becoming the first black respiratory therapist? Or was that just kind of something that just fell in your lap and you found out afterwards?
It was sort of something that just fell in my lap, because to be honest with you, when I started going to Memphis State, my intention was not to graduate. I was a veteran, and I knew that if I went to school, I could get an additional check. And so I started going to Memphis State because I needed an additional income. I had a wife and family, and so I started school just to get the additional funding from the GI Bill. What happened, I woke up one day, and I had about 50 hours, and like a light bulb went off in my head. I said, I could really graduate. And then it occurred to me that I could actually graduate. And so I started getting serious about my studies, and the Lord blessed me. I didn't graduate from Memphis State. I transferred to Christian Brothers in my junior year, and I graduated from Christian Brothers with a degree in Allied Health Administration.
All right, interesting. Take us back to your childhood. What was the influence of your mother? Not having a father, you have about a 60 to 75% rate of black men between the ages of 18 and 35. At least going to prison or some kind of juvenile system. What was the influence, or how important was the influence of your mother, and were there some other male figure in your life that influenced you, that kept you kind of on the straight path?
My mother raised my brother and myself in the Foot Home, a housing project area, without the aid of a father. When I was growing up in the Foot Homes, I had one friend who had a father at home. Nobody else had a father at home. All the role models that I saw were pimps and hustlers. And that was it. Those were the men that we looked up to in the Foot Home, because those were the only men that we saw, were the guys riding through in their fancy cars and their jewelry. And so everybody wanted to be like them. My mother had a different plan. One of the things my mother did was she kept us in church. None of my friends attended church, and they would always tease me because I had to go to church every Sunday. Also, in the Foot Homes, I was the only person I knew that had a curfew. I had to be in the house by 9 o'clock. None of my friends had a curfew. They could stay out as long as they wanted to, but my mother did not allow me to stay out. She made me come home at a decent time. She made me go to church, And that kept me from getting into some things that I would have gotten into. Now, all of those guys that I grew up with either ended up in jail or prison or dead. None of them are around anymore.
Now, was that curfew the street light?
Yeah, well, the street light came on about 7. I had to come in at 9, so I had a little bit of leeway after the street light.
Well, I asked you because my mother, she didn't care what the daylight savings or anything. You had to be in at the street light. All right, okay.
Well, I could stay out at 9 just in high school.
What clue, or did you have any kind of inkling that you were going to be a preacher when you were a little boy? Or was it just something that came gradually as you got older? Or did someone say that to you, or was it something that was, probably prophesied to you, or were there any signs that you were going to be a preacher?
No, growing up in church, we were active in the church, and several of the older mothers, they would always say, well, boy, you're going to be a preacher, and people would say things like that. But I never gave it any serious thought, or I never had any desire to be a preacher. As a matter of fact, I decided once I became a man that I wasn't going to attend church anymore. Mm-hmm. So once I became an adult and moved out of my mother's house, then I stopped going to church for a few years. Mm-hmm. And I really had no desire to come back to the church. Being a preacher had never crossed my mind. Once I had gotten settled in my career, I was also a director for the Department of Respiratory Therapy at the Med. I was the only black in the city of 13 hospitals that had a black director for the department. Mm-hmm. So I was the only one in the city that held the position that I held. So I was settled in my career, and I was enjoying my career. And then the Lord just started putting preaching on my mind. It was like I woke up one day and I just started thinking about preaching. And it was like all day long I would think about preaching. I would come home at night and try to go to bed, and I would think about preaching. I'd wake up in the morning, and I just couldn't get the thought of preaching out of my mind. I thought about it all the time. It was like a burden. And I just kept thinking about preaching. And so I went to every preacher that I knew, and I would ask them, how do you know when God is calling you into the ministry? And I asked about 15 preachers, and everybody gave me the same answer, the exact same answer. They all said, you will know. And so it just stayed, it became a burden, and I thought about it all the time. And so I finally came to the realization that God was calling me into the ministry. And once I decided to accept it, then the burden was lifted. And the strange thing about it, when I was working at the Med, they had selected several directors to send out to the University of Memphis for the executive MBA program. And I had been selected to go to the University of Memphis and enroll in the executive MBA program. Mm-hmm. And the goal was to be on the pathway of becoming a vice president at the hospital. Well, the very same week that I was told that I was selected to go to Memphis State, I had also applied to Memphis Theological Seminary, and I was accepted in the seminary. So I had to make a choice. Was I going to go to the University of Memphis and get the MBA and become a vice president, or was I going to go to seminary and prepare for the Lord's work? And so I went to the president's office and thanked him for even selecting me, considering me for the program. But I told him I had to go to seminary. And so I declined going to the University of Memphis to go to seminary to prepare for the Lord's work.